What would you sacrifice to save the ones you love? What if that sacrifice could either heal the world or destroy it forever? In the heart of the Zambezi Valley, where the mist rises like the breath of sleeping ancestors and the baobab trees stand as ancient sentinels against time, there lived a woman whose voice could summon rain from the clearest sky. Amara possessed a gift that had been passed down through 7 generations of her bloodline, a voice so pure and powerful that when she sang, the very earth would weep with joy. Her small village of Kitengela had never known drought, never known the desperation that plagued neighboring settlements, for Amara's songs kept the rains dancing in perfect rhythm with the seasons. But gifts from the ancestors often come wrapped in both blessing and burden, and Amara's voice carried within it a secret that would shake the foundations of her world. Every full moon, when she climbed the sacred hill of whispering stones to perform the rain ceremony, she would feel a strange pulling in her chest, as if her heart was reaching for something lost, something incomplete. The village elders spoke in hushed tones of an ancient prophecy, one that foretold of a woman whose voice would either save or destroy the balance between the world of the living and the realm of the ancestors. As Amara stood on the hill this particular evening, her 5-year-old daughter Jengo playing at her feet, she had no idea that her next song would set in motion events that would challenge everything she believed about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The storm that night was unlike any that had ever touched Kitengela. Instead of the gentle, life-giving rains that followed Amara's songs, violent winds howled through the village like angry spirits seeking vengeance. Trees that had stood for centuries bent and snapped like twigs, and the river that had always been their source of life began to rage beyond its banks. Amara clutched little Jengo close to her chest as they huddled in their mud-brick home, listening to the supernatural fury unleashing itself upon their world. This was no ordinary storm. It carried with it the smell of magic gone wrong, of ancient powers stirring from their slumber. Through the chaos came a sound that made Amara's blood run cold, the rhythmic beating of drums that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself. The elders had spoken of these drums in whispered legends, the call of the forgotten kings, a summoning that only sounded when the balance between worlds was about to shatter. As lightning split the sky in patterns that formed strange symbols, 3 mysterious figures appeared at Amara's door. They were tall and imposing, their faces painted with white clay in intricate designs that hurt to look upon directly. Their eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of otherworldly knowledge, and when the eldest spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. Keeper of the rain song, your time of choosing has come. The 4 hearts that were separated at your birth must be reunited, or the lands from here to the mountains of the moon shall know only drought and despair. Before Amara could ask what they meant, they vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the lingering scent of wild sage and the terrifying knowledge that her life was about to change forever. When morning came, it brought with it a stranger whose arrival would poison the very roots of Amara's happiness. Kwame Asante rolled into Kitengela with a caravan of loaded wagons and promises that glittered like fool's gold in the morning sun. He was a man of impressive stature, his chest adorned with gold chains that caught the light, his voice smooth as honey wine when he spoke to the gathered villagers. He claimed to be a merchant prince from the great trading cities of the north, and he spun tales of vast markets where a woman's talents could make her rich beyond imagining. His eyes, however, held a calculating coldness that Amara's grandmother would have recognized as the mark of a hyena in human form. Kwame's attention fixed upon Amara like a hunter spotting his prey. He had heard whispers of the rain singer from merchants who traveled the valley trade routes, and he saw in her gift not beauty or wonder, but profit. For 3 days he courted her with gifts of colorful fabrics and exotic spices, filling her ears with stories of the grand life that awaited her in the city. He spoke of concert halls where hundreds would pay gold to hear her sing, of palaces where she could perform for kings and queens. What he did not speak of was his true nature, that he was already married to the daughter of a powerful chief, that his wealth came from selling sacred artifacts stolen from village shrines, that his heart was as barren as the desert in the season of dying grass. When little Jengo tried to hide behind her mother's skirts whenever Kwame approached, her child's instinct sensing the darkness that lurked beneath his charming exterior, Amara should have listened. Instead, dazzled by promises of a better future for her daughter, she began to believe that perhaps the ancestors had sent this man to lift them from their simple village life. The wedding ceremony that Kwame insisted upon was unlike any that Kitengela had ever witnessed. Instead of the traditional three-day celebration filled with dancing, storytelling, and the blessing of both families, Kwame demanded a rushed affair conducted under the new moon, a time that the elders warned was inauspicious for new beginnings. Strange guests arrived from distant places, men and women whose eyes held secrets and whose laughter never reached their hearts. They brought with them customs that made the village children hide behind their mothers' skirts and caused the sacred drums to fall silent as if in mourning. During the ceremony itself, 7 tears fell from Amara's eyes, not tears of joy, but of a sorrow she could not name. Each tear that touched the earth caused a small flower to wither and die, a sign that even nature itself was rejecting this union. The village priestess, Mama Zawadi, pulled Amara aside and spoke in urgent whispers. "Child of the rain song, your tears tell a truth your heart refuses to hear. This man carries the scent of deception like a hyena carries the smell of death. The ancestors are weeping for what is to come." But Kwame's golden words had already taken root in Amara's mind, and she dismissed the old woman's warnings as superstition. As the ceremony concluded with rituals that felt more like curses than blessings, the very air seemed to grow heavy with foreboding. That night, as Kwame slept beside his new wife, Amara dreamed of 4 children crying out for their mother across vast distances, their voices carried on winds that tasted of salt and sorrow. The journey to Kwame's city took them through landscapes that grew progressively more barren and hostile with each passing mile. Where once the land had been green and fertile, now they travelled across red dust plains where only thorn bushes and scavenger birds seemed to thrive. Little Jengo, who had always been a bright and chattering child, grew silent and withdrawn, her large eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed far too old for her 5 years. She would point at things that weren't there and speak to invisible companions in a language that sounded like wind chimes dancing in a gentle breeze. As they approached the city walls, Amara felt her rain-calling powers beginning to weaken, as if the very stones of this place were somehow draining the music from her soul. The city itself was a maze of narrow alleys and towering buildings that blocked out the sky, where the air tasted of smoke and desperation. Here, children begged in the streets, while wealthy merchants passed by in golden palanquins, their eyes deliberately blind to suffering. Kwame's true home was revealed to be not a palace, but a cramped compound where his first wife, Folake, waited with barely concealed hatred burning in her eyes. She was pregnant with Kwame's child, her belly swollen with the promise of an heir, and she made it clear from the moment Amara arrived that there was room for only one queen in this particular hive. The other women in the compound, for there were several, all of them bearing the same hollow look of dreams crushed under the weight of false promises, welcomed Amara with the bitter sympathy of those who had walked this path before. As night fell on their first day in the city, Amara realized with growing horror that she had not found a new life, but had instead entered a gilded cage from which escape might prove impossible. 3 moons passed in the city, and with each passing day, Amara felt herself growing weaker. Her voice, once capable of calling rain from cloudless skies, now struggled to produce even the simplest melodies. The other wives whispered that Folaka had been adding bitter herbs to Amara's food, not enough to kill, but sufficient to cloud her mind and drain her power. Jengo, too, was changing, her bright spirit dimming like a flame starved of air. The child spent her days sitting by a dirty window, humming strange songs that seemed to make the very walls of their prison tremble with recognition. It was during the Festival of Ancestors that the first of the 3 boys appeared. Amara was in the compound's central courtyard, struggling to remember the rain song that had once flowed from her lips as naturally as breathing, when she heard a voice calling from beyond the walls. The voice was young, but carried within it a strength that made her heart skip with hope. "Mama," the voice called, though she had never heard it before. "Mama, we are coming for you." When she looked up at the high wall that surrounded their prison, she saw a face peering down at her, a boy of perhaps 10 years, with her own dark eyes and a smile that seemed to carry starlight. He was there for only a moment before disappearing, leaving Amara to wonder if hunger and despair had finally driven her to hallucinations. But Jengo had seen him too. That night, as they lay on their thin sleeping mat, the little girl whispered to her mother about the boy who looked like family, about dreams where she had brothers who could fly like birds and fight like lions. "They're looking for us, Mama," she said, with the certainty that only children possess. "The storm spirits told me. We just have to hold on until they come." As Amara held her daughter close, she felt for the first time in months a stirring of the old power within her chest, as if the mere possibility of these mysterious children was enough to kindle hope in her dying heart. High in the Simeon Mountains, where the air grows thin and the gods are said to walk among mortals, there lived an ancient master known only as Baba Tembo, the father of elephants. His monastery was carved from living rock, its chambers echoing with the whispered wisdom of centuries. Here, 3 boys who had been pulled from a raging river 7 years ago trained in arts that went far beyond mere combat. Zuberi, the eldest at 10 years, could call upon the strength of his elephant namesake and move boulders with his bare hands. Django's twin brother, Tao, possessed the speed and cunning of the leopard, able to move through shadows without disturbing so much as a leaf. The youngest, 8-year-old Kessie, had been blessed by the wind spirits themselves. He could leap between treetops and run across water as if it were solid ground. Baba Tembo had found these children floating in wooden baskets on the flood-swollen river, each bearing a jade amulet carved with symbols that spoke of royal blood and ancient destiny. He had raised them not just as warriors but as guardians of the old ways, teaching them that true strength came not from the body but from the purity of one's purpose. For 7 years they had trained and grown, always feeling an inexplicable emptiness in their hearts that no amount of martial skill could fill. The master had told them of their origins, how they had been stolen from their mother by those who feared their power, how their sister lived in a distant place where the rain no longer fell, how their mother's voice grew weaker with each passing season. Now, as the monsoon season approached and their training neared completion, Baba Tembo called the 3 brothers to him. His ancient eyes, clouded with cataracts but still sharp with inner sight, fixed upon each boy in turn. "The time has come," he said, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. "Your mother calls out in her sleep. Your sister weeps tears that no comfort can dry. The man who separated your family grows bolder in his cruelty, and dark forces gather like storm clouds on the horizon. You must go to them now, but beware. The journey ahead will test not just your skills but your very souls. For in saving your family, you may be required to make sacrifices that will echo through generations yet unborn." As he spoke these words, the 3 jade amulets around the boys' necks began to glow with an inner fire. And somewhere far away, in a dusty compound in the city of echoes, a little girl looked up at the sky and smiled for the first time in months. In the twisted alleys of the night market, where honest merchants dare not tread and the desperate come to trade in things that should never be sold, Kwame met with shadowy figures whose faces were hidden beneath masks of carved bone. These were the debt collectors of the southern kingdoms, men who dealt in human suffering with the casual efficiency of farmers harvesting grain. Kwame owed them more than money. He owed them souls, promises made in desperation when his schemes had begun to crumble like sandcastles in a storm. They had come to collect, and their payment would be measured in innocence destroyed and dreams shattered beyond repair. The leader of these creatures, a thin man whose voice sounded like breaking glass, laid out terms that made even Kwame's blackened heart recoil. They wanted Amara's voice, wanted to steal it completely and sell it to the highest bidder among the sorcerer kings of the desert realms. They wanted Django as well, for children with the gift of spirit sight were rare and valuable in their dark markets. In return, they would forgive Kwame's debts and grant him wealth enough to buy a small kingdom. The merchant, who had once been handsome, now appeared gaunt and haunted, his golden chains tarnished with the corrosion of moral decay. As he agreed to their terms with a signature written in his own blood, the very air around the market began to thicken with malevolent energy. Somewhere in the distance, dogs began to howl in harmonies that spoke of approaching doom, and in their cramped compound, Amara woke from nightmares of children, calling her name across impossible distances. The Festival of Broken Masks was the city's most important celebration, a time when the wealthy displayed their power while the poor were expected to be grateful for whatever scraps fell from their tables. This year, Kwame had arranged something special. He would present his wife's extraordinary gift to the assembled nobles, charging them handsomely for the privilege of hearing the rain singer perform. What the audience did not know was that this would be Amara's final performance, for hidden among the crowd were the debt collectors, ready to steal her voice the moment her song reached its crescendo. Amara stood on the raised platform, her body weak from months of subtle poisoning, but her spirit suddenly blazing with desperate fire. As she began to sing, her voice cracked and trembled, barely a shadow of its former glory. The nobles laughed and whispered among themselves, dismissing her as a fraud. But then something extraordinary happened. Little Jengo, who had been sitting forgotten in the shadows, began to hum along with her mother's song. The child's voice, pure and untrained but carrying within it the same ancestral power that had blessed their bloodline, began to lift and strengthen Amara's failing melody. Together, mother and daughter created a harmony so beautiful that the very stones of the amphitheatre began to weep tears of joy. It was then that the first of the three brothers appeared. Tao, moving with the liquid grace of his leopard spirit, materialized from the shadows behind the debt collectors. His appearance was so sudden and silent that for a moment even these creatures of darkness were taken aback. "You who would steal the music of the earth," he said, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "Know that you face not just a woman and child, but the guardians of the old ways." As he spoke, Zuberi dropped from the amphitheatre's roof with earth-shaking force, while Kessie seemed to dance on the wind itself, appearing and disappearing like a ghost made of starlight. The three boys had finally found their family, and they had come prepared for war. What followed was a battle that would be remembered in song and story for generations to come. The debt collectors, creatures who had fed on human misery for centuries, found themselves facing opponents they had never encountered. Children whose hearts burned with love so pure it acted as armor against their dark magic. Zuberi's massive fists shattered the bone masks they wore, revealing faces so twisted by evil that looking upon them directly could drive mortals mad. Tao moved between them like shadow made flesh, his strikes precise and devastating. Kessie seemed to be everywhere at once, deflecting their sorcerous attacks with movements that defied the very laws of nature. But it was when the 5 family members, mother, daughter, and 3 sons, joined voices that true magic began to manifest. Their combined song created a harmony that had not been heard since the world was young, when the first humans learned to speak with the voices of gods. The sound shattered the chains that bound not just their own hearts, but the hearts of every person in the amphitheatre who had ever known true loss. Flowers burst from cracks in the stone, rain began to fall from cloudless skies, and the assembled nobles found themselves weeping for reasons they could not name. The debt collectors, creatures of pure malice who could not bear to exist in the presence of such love, began to dissolve like shadows before the dawn. Their dying screams echoed across dimensions, serving as warning to all who would prey upon the innocent that the guardians of the old ways had returned. As the last of the dark creatures faded into nothingness, Kwame stood revealed for what he truly was. Not a merchant prince, but a broken man whose soul had been eaten away by greed and selfishness until nothing remained but emptiness wearing human flesh. He collapsed to his knees before his wife, begging for forgiveness that he knew he did not deserve. But Amara's eyes, now blazing with the restored fire of her ancestors, held no anger, only pity for a man who had traded everything real for illusions that crumbled at the first touch of truth. If you're loving this epic tale, please subscribe, comment below, and share this video. Tell us in the comments if you want to see part 2 of this incredible story.